These are images of a satellite control network remote tracking station. And if that sounds technical, it is. Where spy satellite images are downlinked for use by the US military is part of a secretive military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean on an island called Diego Garcia, the largest of the Chagos Archipelago at the junction between Africa, the Middle East, South Asia and Southeast Asia. But on May 22nd, the UK signed agreement to return sovereignty of the islands to Mauritius, with the exception of Diego Garcia. The island, which exclusively houses the joint US and UK base, will remain under British control thanks to a 99-year lease. Critics argue the move could expose the base and islands to Chinese influence, given Mauritius's close links with Beijing. And the original inhabitants, forcibly expelled in the 1960s onwards, also say they have once again been ignored. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. Joining us today are Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia, and Marcin Jerzewski, European Values Center for Security Policy, Taiwan Office Head. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today.
Thank you.
Since the 1970s, Diego Garcia has hosted the joint US-UK military base as part of the Chagos Islands, which Mauritius said it was forced to give up as part of its own independence. Let's hear what the UK Prime Minister said about securing the base.
The base is one of the most significant contributions that we make to our security relationship with the United States. Almost everything we do from the base is in partnership with the US. The strategic location of this base is of the utmost significance, from deploying aircraft to defeat terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan, to anticipating threats in the Red Sea and the Indo-Pacific.
Marcin, let's start with you first. So we heard that, threats from the Indo-Pacific. Let's address the concerns over the threat from China. Why is it that handing Chagos sovereignty to Mauritius means that you increase the risk from China?
We could argue that China has viewed Mauritius as a jumping base, as a jumping point for expanding its relations with Africa, particularly in the economic domain. The free trade agreement between China and Mauritius came very early on, and it followed a pattern of an experimental approach to expanding economic ties with different regions that China has pursued. For example, choosing New Zealand, a relatively small economy, as the first FTA partner, which is a developed country, and choosing Iceland as its FTA partner in 2013. Then came Mauritius. So economic links are very strong, but now with Chagos Islands returning under Mauritian sovereignty, it is very likely that despite the subsidies offered by the United Kingdom, China would try to engage with Mauritius on those islands also through commercial investments. But commercial investments can be very closely interlinked with projects that are aimed to benefit security interests, first and foremost, even before economic interests of China.
Right, absolutely. And of course, that pathway that you spoke about, it might start with trade and commerce, as you said, and then graduate to infrastructure, Belt and Road infrastructure.
Absolutely. I think that there is a very high likelihood of this gradual approach, and we are already seeing the confluence of economic and security cooperation being implemented between Beijing and Port Louis. So on top of the FTA, which I believe makes economic sense, also given the relatively healthy economy of Mauritius and also participation of that island country in several multilateral trade frameworks in Africa, for example, the Common Market for Southern and Eastern Africa. China is also contributing to initiatives such as Smart and Safe City project in Mauritius that is also increasing its technological and law enforcement footprint in the country.
Yeah, and I believe that Huawei is embedded in the country.
Yeah.
Is that true? Yeah. Tony, so why have so many analysts said that the deal poses a national strategic risk for the US?
Actually, it's for the entire region. So China wants to eventually dominate the Indian Ocean area. So if you look at China's facility, they started with Myanmar, and now they control a port in Sri Lanka. They have facility in Pakistan, in Yemen, and in Djibouti. So basically, they can influence the Strait of Malaccas and also Bab el-Mandeb into the Red Sea. Now, if they can have some kind of a foothold in Chagos, then it will be a significant piece in the middle of that string of pearls. So from a military point of view, that is a significant threat because Diego Garcia is so important. If China gets a foothold, they could possibly disrupt that military operation of the US and UK forces.
Right. And what exactly is there? We started the show, with the satellite, the tracking system, very technical, but it's also, a full-blown military base, isn't it? Naval, Air Force?
Absolutely. So initially it was built for Navy to support US Navy fleet in the Indian Ocean area. And then we built a 12,000-foot runway. It is a humongous runway. It can handle anything, including space shuttle. If they have trouble, they could land it there. And so from that base, we can hold at risk the entire Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And in addition, with the growing importance of space, that location became critical to our Space Force. We have a deep space monitoring station there that watches over 9,000 items in the space. Anything that comes close to Earth that might threaten Earth, such as a meteor or something, this thing was going to pick it up. This position and another one on United States mainland and Hawaii basically monitors for the Earth, to protect the Earth. Then we also have a station that flies our satellites. Satellites, most people think they just circle around the Earth. But we have satellites in case there's an event somewhere we want to take a closer look, then we have to fly it to a different position. This is one of the stations that flies it, along with several others, because as they move through the Earth, the field of view changes. So when it comes to above the Indian Ocean, then this station flies it to a certain spot. If we want to look at Iran closer because of something, then this place does it. And it has a communication link, the high-frequency link, that connects up our HF so that our ships and airplanes can communicate globally. So these are all important things. And plus, we have the maritime preposition ship squadron there. We need to respond to contingency throughout the world. So we have these preposition ships in different parts of the world. In the Indian Ocean, those ships are in the Indian Ocean. What it does is these ships are constantly loaded with weapons, tanks, and stuff, so that in case there's contingency, like during the Gulf War, the ships basically went to Saudi Arabia. All we did was flying the troops there to match up with the equipment, because we don't have time to fly 700 tanks, all these Humvees and armored personnel carrier. So these ships are fully loaded with munitions and equipment to respond to contingency. So for that part of the world, Diego Garcia is the home of our preposition ships. So that shows how important Diego Garcia is to United States global strategy.
Right. And, from your description of it, it seems that it is an axis. It's fundamental, really, because I understand that it had a sort of bridging function. At that particular base, it was the command and control of the Polaris Poseidon submarines in the Atlantic and the Pacific fleets in the Cold War. And given today's threats and challenges, would you say that its location, it becomes even more important?
Oh, absolutely. Use the submarines. So submarines, they need to receive information, and they need to receive it a certain way. And this information has to be passed to them through a different area because of the footprint of satellite and also our communication aircraft that communicates with some submarines. So they fly out of Diego Garcia for the entire region. We have Hawaii and Guam for the Pacific area, and we have other areas in the Atlantic that covers all the critical important places that our submarine resides. So yeah, it's very important even in that realm. I cannot overstate the importance of Diego Garcia. That's why it was critical that the British government was able to reach a 99-year lease to continue the military operation on the island.
Okay. Marcin, so if the Indian Ocean comes into play, has a role in a Taiwan crisis, not a direct role, but in terms of the shipping, does that mean that Diego Garcia also will?
I believe that Diego Garcia might play a role in a potential Taiwan contingency, and the nexus of economy and security, economy and defense is very much at the forefront of any well-founded analysis of Chinese aspirations amid their expansion. And in order to sustain that expansion, China needs fuel. And a lot of its fuel comes through the Indian Ocean. So the estimates suggest that about 62% of its gas and 17% of its oil come through the Indian Ocean, which means that in case of a kinetic manifestation of a Taiwan contingency, if that conflict is protracted, as Russian invasion in Ukraine, for example, then China might encounter very significant logistical challenges if the transit of these fossil fuels is disrupted. Of course, the counter-argument to that would be that it's not only China that relies on transit of fossil fuels through the Indian Ocean, because, for instance, Japan and South Korea, United States allies, also depend on this transportation route. That's why the Strait of Malacca is such a geopolitical choke point. But that's definitely a factor that Chinese leadership should keep at the back of their heads as they revise their ever-changing Taiwan calculus.
And Tony, why would you say that Diego Garcia is so secretive? Because I understand that on Guam, families are allowed to enter the base, but this is not the case for Diego.
Pretty much that whole island is packed with military facilities, and it's hard to control if we have civilian within it. So you mentioned in the beginning of the show, the downlink of our spy satellite and stuff. All of those are highly classified, and actually, almost everything we do on that island are highly classified. I think that's the reason why. Plus, the island's not very big, and if we fly out of that island, and if we have somebody who reports that, hey, we got B-1 just took off toward that direction, that gives our enemy early warning. So I think that's a concern, not to have civilians on board. In addition, most of the supplies are flown in. There isn't much to sustain a civilian population. So I think those are some of the reasons why they'd rather not have civilian population on the base.
Right, okay. In 2024, India and Mauritius built an India-funded runway and jetty on Agalega Island in northern Mauritius, which can support the Indian Navy's surveillance planes and anti-submarine warfare aircraft. In March this year, Narendra Modi visited the country and upgraded the bilateral relationship to an enhanced strategic partnership. And in April, Mauritius participated in India-led naval exercises in the Indian Ocean. The inaugural ICAME exercise, standing for Africa-India Key Maritime Engagement, lasted 6 days, involving nations that border the Indian Ocean. The drills are part of India's position as a security partner of choice in the region. Marcin, let me ask you, so we hear a lot about China's build-up. It often takes the limelight, but India is also countering, isn't it? It is quietly building this kind of infrastructure in its own backyard, in its own region.
Yeah. I mean, India has a proven record of looking at the Indian Ocean as its own lake, as its own backyard pond, and this dynamic manifests itself also in the growing security partnership between India and Mauritius. When we try to understand the relationship between these two countries, it's important to zoom in on people-to-people ties. Many inhabitants of Mauritius trace their ancestry back to indentured laborers who were brought over to the islands during the time of British colonization. So even during his most recent visit to Mauritius, Prime Minister Modi has reiterated that he looks at it as mini India and a brotherly nation. One of the main outcomes of Modi's visit to Mauritius was an expansion of overseas citizen of India identification cards to now the 7th generation of Indian Mauritians. But on top of these people-to-people ties, which are a foundation, as security cooperation is sprouting. And also during Modi's visit, when India and Mauritius elevated their ties to an elevated strategic partnership, one of the major areas for cooperation which was highlighted was maritime security cooperation. So we see that India in that sense is almost matching China by understanding how entangled economic and security issues really are when it comes to the neighborhood.
Agalega, how interesting is this? Is this, in effect, a military base?
It is beginning to be. It's an access point for Indian PA, the anti-submarine warfare aircraft, and also maritime monitoring.
I have to say that India says that this is not the case, though.
Right, but so far, I don't see much Indian commercial airliner landing on that big runway that the Indian just built. But I think they're confident that their defense relationship with Mauritius will continue because, as you know, Indian officers are actually embedded in the Mauritius military. So even though China is gaining points on economic development, infrastructure, and getting a lot of goodwill there, but as far as the defense relationship, India still feels confident that they can maintain it. I think that's another reason why they didn't see too much problem of British leaving, and they think they can slide in that position.
Yes, because Modi, of course, welcomed this transfer of sovereignty.
Precisely. He feels, now it's my turn. I think that's how Indians view it.
You wanted to jump in, Marcin?
Well, on the economic front, the relationship between India and Mauritius is expanding as well. So coming back to this idea of the two areas being very strongly connected, and in many ways, some of the promises that Modi brought to Port Louis reflect the modus operandi of Chinese development cooperation. So, for instance, India offered to build a new facility for the House of Parliament in Mauritius, so a nod to the current administration. And additionally, the joint statement following Modi's visit has enumerated a number of joint projects that are looking specifically at enhancing human development outcomes in Mauritius. So, for instance, building new educational and health facilities. So in that sense, India is not only an established defense partner, but also increasingly plays a role as a provider of development cooperation rather than only being a beneficiary thereof.
Well, let's go to the next question. So in October, when Britain's government announced that it was finalising details of the treaty, Britain's main opposition party slammed the government for surrendering control of the territory. And the now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, also said it posed, quote, a serious threat to US national security. But now Trump backs the agreement, and Rubio himself welcomed it, saying it, quote, secures the long-term stable and effective operation of Diego Garcia base, a critical asset for regional and global security. Tony, so what changed between October and May?
That 99-year agreement. I think that's the key because United States really, the only thing United States care about is maintaining military presence on Diego Garcia, part of the Chagos. They don't care about the rest of the Chagos, but Diego Garcia. So once the Brits were able to obtain that 99-year agreement for Diego Garcia, I think at that point, United States say, hey, we're okay.
And what do you make of this, the 39-kilometer buffer? What kind of protections does that offer? Is it watertight?
It is not watertight. I wish it's 100 kilometer. However, such a case, 39 kilometer in modern day technology is not very far.
Yeah, so what was the point of setting it at that then?
I have no idea. I don't know who came up with 39 kilometers. Maybe it's the distance between the next island or something. I have not been able to figure it out. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that one.
Okay, no problem. And Marcin, of course, whenever we hear 99-year lease, especially when it comes to territory, we are reminded of the situation in Hong Kong. Will it be similar to Hong Kong, where in 99 years from now, people will be wondering why it wasn't longer than 99 years?
Absolutely. I think that Indian Ocean is a very interesting theater for us to watch, also in light of growing ambitions of India and growing capability of India to realize these regional ambitions. So Diego Garcia.
So are you saying that they might actually threaten the sort of long-term security of the US or the UK, India?
I think that maybe we shouldn't say that India will throw off security of the US and the UK, but India will definitely try to take care of its interests first.
Okay. Now, the UK controlled the Chagos Islands, now known as the British Indian Ocean Territory, since 1814. Mauritius says it was illegally forced to give up the Chagos Islands in return for its independence. In an advisory opinion in 2019, the International Court of Justice in The Hague ruled that the UK's process of decolonisation of Mauritius was unlawful and that Britain is obliged to, quote, bring to an end its administration of the Chagos Archipelago as rapidly as possible. So maybe I'll go to Tony on this one. So we heard about the ICJ judgment or advice, but what were the other reasons you think that the UK decided that it had to act sooner rather than later?
I think it was a diplomatic move where UK did not want to come down as not following the international court decision because it actually damages your reputation when you do things like that. And they probably also view, once again, Diego Garcia is the only piece they care. Everything else, they don't care. And so I think that's where they weighted the cost benefit and, okay, we can take care of the important part. Then let's go ahead and allow this to go on and make us look like a good guy. Yeah.
And they talked about, Starmer talked about, making the deal on their terms, as opposed to if Mauritius then filed a lawsuit over them.
Right.
So they could have actually lost that base, essentially.
Exactly. You could have lost everything unless you stand up and say, I just don't listen to you, which would be bad diplomatically also. So I think that the British have weighted it and decided this is the right thing to do as long as we can secure Diego Garcia, which they did.
Right. Marcin?
I can only second these comments. I believe that the diplomatic calculus was very important here, and it has a failure to follow international law for the UK would undermine its reputation, not only theoretically, but in light of two very real interactions between London and its adversaries, Russia and China. How could the UK criticize Russia for violating international law in Ukraine if it kept violating international law in its dealings with Mauritius? How could the UK voice its opposition to China, ignoring rulings about its endeavors in the South China Sea if it didn't follow international law on Mauritius? So it's not theoretical, it's actually very real in light of the challenges in both the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific theater, which are two theaters of major importance for the UK and its security interests.
And let's end the show, Tony, on talking about what China could possibly do. I mean, there have been many senators in the US who are quite angry about the path that this has taken. I'll quote US Senator James Risch. He's a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He said that it just gives in to Chinese lawfare. It yields to pressure from unaccountable international institutions like the ICJ, at the expense of US and UK strategic and military interests. How many people does that 99-year lease satisfy? Or is that just simply not long-term enough?
The biggest risk is if China was able to continue to influence Mauritius, and they do as they did with Hong Kong, just threw out their agreement, what can you do, right? I think that's our concern. That piece of paper says 99 years, but how strong is that piece of paper if the host nation decides to disregard it?
Yeah, after 50 years, which is...
Or less, like basic law, 50 years. After 4 years, in Hong Kong, the Lego got interfered. You can only elect these people that I say you can elect. So similar things, I think, is a concern for U.S. and whether Mauritius will honor that 99 years.
Yeah. And Marcin, in that situation, what can the UK or the US do?
I believe that strengthening partnerships with India will be key here, also given India's interests in that part of the world and also India's credibility in conversations with other countries in the global majority, because we have seen on multiple occasions that China has sought to instrumentalize narratives of post-colonization to realize its own interests. So that's why bringing on board a partner in a format such as Quad, for instance, it would be very beneficial to the US and the UK.
Okay, well, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, Tony Hu and Marcin Jerzewski, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.